All right, I want to start by saying first and foremost that I am not a resident of Montclair. I also did not grow up in the state of New Jersey. And you may be able to hear that as I'm going through my presentation when I go from my northern accent to my southern accent to my Caribbean accent and a host of other accents. But I follow in the tradition, first and foremost, of my ancestors who journeyed from the south to the north seeking the promised land. So I want to first and foremost thank you all for coming out tonight. I understand there's harsh conditions outside, but I have worked in Montclair for some time. I've worked with the Partners for Health Foundation, members at Montclair State University, Bike and Walk Montclair, and Jerry Freed and I, Mayor Freed and I, we sort of led the charge throughout the state to encourage many towns to adopt complete street policies. So in that spirit, I'm going to go forward with my presentation by first showing you this beautiful picture of Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair. And I'm showing you this presentation because it is basically, this photo, because it frames the genesis of my discussion today, which is the fact that transportation in Montclair are almost inseparable. And the reason why is because when I look on your website and I look at the history of Montclair, you could see the importance of transportation and access in Montclair's history. You see it in 1694 when the Cranes built their home at the intersection of Orange Road and Myrtle Avenue. You see it in the early 1700s when Valley Road was laid out, linking the two settlements, which was Southern and now Upper Montclair. You see the boulder marking the site of Washington's headquarters at the corner of Claremont Avenue and Valley Road. You also see it in the 1800s when the turnpike known as Bloomfield Avenue transected Montclair as it did in the previous photo, increasing the flow of commerce. You also see it in the completion of the Morris Canal in 1831, which led to an increase in economic development. But you really see it, as you are framing, in the most decisive event to take place in Montclair, which was the coming of the railroads. So new residents, they wanted a model country town, and they wanted one with convenient access to New York. So transportation has always been important in Montclair. But sometimes we forget our history. And my presentation here today is to tell you that our differences are reconcilable, and I'll state why. Today, Montclair is a family-centered town. It is a seasoned community. It is one that remains alive to the spirit of the town. Now, the spirits of the times. Now, by spirit of the time, what we mean here is, or what I believe you mean, you're speaking to the ideas, beliefs, and style of a particular period of time. If that was true, it was true, in 2009 when Montclair adopted the first complete street policy in the state. But we have to ask the question now, is our current transportation-related investments and policy decisions reflective of the ideas, beliefs, and the styles of this particular time we stand in? I've led multiple pedestrian safety workshops across Montclair, and the residents say no. They say no as a collective because I'm sure you hear their voices where they're screaming for pedestrians to be elevated above cars. They say that we here in Montclair have an auto-centric environment, one that ignores pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, etc. So here's their collective voice. They are screaming for you to recognize the fact that more investments, etc., need to be made in your transportation infrastructure, not for cars, but for pedestrians and others. But we also see it in the data. Being a transportation researcher, I have access to pedestrian crash data across the state, and we know that more than 450 pedestrians were injured and 7 killed between the years of 2003 and 2013 in Montclair. We know that Montclair has one of the highest total number of vehicle and pedestrian crash rates in all of Essex County. We know that Montclair has one of the highest total numbers of bicyclists involved in crashes in Essex County as well. We also know that the majority of those vehicle and pedestrian crashes happen at intersections which are supposed to be safe zones for all of pedestrians. We also know that the largest proportion of those crashes happen on Bloomfield Avenue. Oh, if we could only take Bloomfield Avenue back to that beautiful picture. Because Bloomfield Avenue has become the elephant in the room. Largest proportion of those crashes involve those ages 0 to 17. Our youth are being injured and killed on Montclair streets. Also, a sizable majority of the crashes involve those 65 years and older, the seniors. Now, my grandmother is 65. Well, she's a little older than 65 now, but when she was 65, she didn't want me to refer to her as a senior. So I apologize if that word is offensive in any way. And also, majority of vehicle and pedestrian crashes involve females. And I want to pause for a minute because it's important that we take this information in. Transportation seems to be an afterthought. But transportation, each day, you began, yes. Those hit by cars, yes. During that time period. Injured, yes. All right, so once again, we're talking about this spirit of the times. So I asked the question in the context of transportation and moving forward into the future of Montclair, what are the beliefs, the ideas, and the styles of this particular and future time? Well, people are screaming for you to provide options and access for all residents. The ADA community, bicyclists, pedestrians, women, as well as those who choose simply to not buy a car or own a car. And one way that you could do this is continue with the work that Jerry and many others have been doing across the state, which is advancing quickly Complete Streets implementation. And if you are not familiar with Complete Streets are streets that are designed, operated, and maintained with all users in mind. So if a person is against Complete Streets, I would ask the question, why? It's say all users. It's not anti-motorists, it's all users. Also, in the spirit of this, people are saying, well, we need to accommodate the pedestrians of Montclair. They have basic needs such as sidewalks, crosswalks, pedestrian scale lighting as well. But what we should pursue or should be looking into is lowering the speed limit throughout Montclair to 20 miles per hour. We should look into adopting a Vision Zero policy in Montclair and some of those other things that would make it safer for everyone in here today. But what about the bicyclists of Montclair? They're not all white men wearing Lycra. Women ride bikes. People with disabilities ride bikes. Children ride bikes. So think about your kids, your grandkids, your sisters, your brother, everyone that chooses to ride a bicycle. They need bicycle lanes. They need sharrows. They need bicycle parking. But for those who don't want to bike full time, they also need bike sharing programs. They need better connectivity to parks, to employment centers, etc. Many times throughout Montclair, you could go to the back of a restaurant and you don't see a car parked there for the person working there. You see a bicycle. Those people need to get safely to and from their destination as well. But it doesn't stop there, as I stated. The children of Montclair have needs. Safe routes to school, crossing guards, they need it all. But more importantly, you need to be looking into developing school-wide travel plans and creating separate places for children to safely bike to and from school. And then the women of Montclair, they show up in the data. Can all the women please raise their hand in the room? Raise your hand. Show how powerful you are in the room right now. Turn it into a fist. There we go. All right. That's what I'm talking about. See, what I can tell you about urban planning, urban and regional planning, especially city design, it has marginalized and jeopardized the safety of women. There needs to be more pedestrian scale lighting, more direction at bus stops and actual bus stops, and I'll get to that in a second. things to consider the women. So when planning meetings are taking place here, I hope that the voices of women are heard first and foremost. Also, the seniors of Montclair, you have a very active senior community here, one that I have a great deal of respect for, one that I talk about all over the nation. You all do a great job bringing up your issues. We know that you need more benches, you need transportation options, sidewalks, crosswalks, all the things that everyone else needs. But your needs should be prioritized. Your needs should be prioritized, and I'll talk about that a little more as well. And then there are the public transportation users of Montclair, those who either choose not to buy a car, those who cannot afford one. What's the deal with their bus stops? Who here would want to stand in a place where you're going to get rained on, where a car is going to jump the curve and hit you? We don't make it attractive at all for people to use public transit, and their needs need to be elevated or prioritized as well. And then there's the ADA community. This is Mike and Ann Krumer, my friends. They ride their bicycles all over the state of New Jersey. And they remind me and many others that they like to bike, but they also need sidewalks, crosswalks, pedestrian scale lighting as well, and they need you to make your transportation investments and policy decisions a priority. And then there are the low-income and minority communities. I agree that we shouldn't speak in terms of diversity, we should speak in terms of inclusion, but what I want to show you today is a map of the communities of concern. Communities of concern, shown here in orange, are low-income, minority community, elderless house, senior household, carless households, etc., shown in orange. The crashes that you see in purple there, let me pull this up. So the dots you see in orange that are purple represent crashes, vehicle-to-pedestrian crashes that happen in communities of concern. The gray area represents a non-community of concern. You can see that 89% of the crashes happen in communities of concern, and only 11% happen in non-communities of concern. Now, I don't have to walk you all out of this building to show you where the community of concern is in Montclair, but you know you have it. And it's shown here in orange, and you can see that in that area, crashes are happening more disproportionately than they are happening outside of that zone. The crash rate is higher per 1,000 as well as square miles as well, nearly 10 times as high. When we look at the crash rate per 1,000 people across the entire 14 county or 13 county northern New Jersey area, you can see that in communities of concern, the crash rate was 6.0 to 2.3, nearly 3 times higher. And when you look at it by square miles, you can see that it's nearly 10 times higher. So what that means is that if you are in a community of concern, you're almost 10 times likely to get hit by a car than your counterparts. And so when we look at crash severity, meaning what happens once you get hit by that car, you can see here that in terms of those killed, it's nearly doubled in communities of concern versus none. Incapacitated, moderate injury, as well as complaint of pain. So you may ask, when we have all these people competing for these resources, how can leadership sort of ensure that transportation equity happens in the process? Well, we must start then with a definition of equity. And equity simply refers to the fairness with which impacts, both benefits and costs, are distributed. There are 3 forms of equity, and I want to touch on them briefly today. The first form is horizontal equity. It's the equity that most people in here can easily identify with. Horizontal equity is simply saying that equal individuals and groups should receive equal shares of resources, bear equal costs, and in other ways be treated the same. That's what we have when we approach the discussion of equity most times throughout the state. But I'm saying today, given the exceptionality of the historic struggle of many people in your community, that you should be considering a different sort of equity. And that equity is one that is in regards to income and social class. I've shown you that they have disproportionately been impacted by crashes, so this is one of the reasons why I'm saying so. And then getting back with the seniors in the room, as well as those who suffer from immobility of some sort due to physical or cognitive issues, we should look at equity in regard to mobility and need as well. And this is important. Why? Because Montclair started at an intersection. You are now at an intersection. You are at the crossroads. And when it comes to your future, I cannot predict it. I can simply show you this blank slide. But what I can tell each of you in the room today is that you have the decision before you. You have the ability to change it. Thank you very much.